Today we're looking at the top 10 rookies from week 1 for fantasy football. We're looking at their production. We're looking at what they did on the field, how many targets, how many times they touched the ball. Can that lead to more fantasy production? And what should we be doing with these guys in our fantasy leagues? But before we dig in, you need to click that subscribe button right now. We're talking about these players every day. We're talking about the waiver wire extensively. We're using these videos to help you set your lineups. I'll have some lineup videos, the must starts, the sneaky starts coming out soon. But we're looking at the rookies right now, and you need to know about your rookies. You need to know which guys are going to hit throughout the season and what to look for when these guys start making plays. Click that button. Stop missing out. So our top rookie, or top skilled rookie that we're going to talk about today, Xavier Worthy. Big time performance on Thursday night against the Ravens. 3 targets, 11.11% target share. Had that carry for the touchdown. Speed for days. Nothing that surprises with that. He was a wide receiver 1, ranked as the wide receiver 11 with 20.8 PPR fantasy points. And like I said, leading into the start of the season, this is a wide receiver that you're going to be sitting through games wondering when it's going to happen. Then all of a sudden a big play happens. And there might be a few games where nothing happens, and then the next game, boom, he goes off, he explodes. And that's just his game. You have him on your fantasy right now. You're excited to have him. And he's got 3 targets, 11.1% target share. I don't like the target share. I do like the air yards, though. At 12.2 ADOT is very good. And this was a game that had weird volume to it. It was against that Ravens. And that game was just a weird matchup. You got the Bengals this week. They're talking crap about him in the media. That 4.2 speed, though, can really light a fire under a defense. They also got to worry about Rashee Rice. And with Hollywood Brown out for a long time, Xavier Worthy is a guy to look at. Lad McConkey, 7 targets, a 28% target share. That 28% target share is elite. That's top tier for any wide receiver in a National Football League, not just rookies. Ran 22 routes, 75.9% route participation rate. He had 37 air yards and a 23.1% share of the air yards, but scored 14.9 PPR fantasy points, was the wide receiver 19 on the week. The thing about him, he's got speed. He's getting a large portion of the targets at 28%. This is a small sample of one game, but when you look at the wide receivers he's competing for targets, you also got Palmer, who's injured right now, who's questionable. He is going to just eat more. The thing about this offense, though, it's slower pace, less volume. 7 targets is plenty of volume for a wide receiver, let alone a rookie wide receiver. So there's some upside. Look for him to grow into this role and become more fantasy viable down the line. Brian Thomas Jr. He had 4 targets and a 21% target share. This was a weird game against the Dolphins. The Dolphins has been in 2 weird games so far, but he ran a lot of routes. Had that ball go deep to him back in the end zone. A lot of shorter routes as well, but he managed to score 14.7 PPR fantasy points. Wide receiver 20. So we got some upside here. We're already a wide receiver 2 in fantasy football. And the thing is, when the ball's flowing, going deep downfield, Brian Thomas is going to get those targets. Right now, you're loving having him on your fantasy team. Devaughn, Vele, a lot of you guys picked him up off waivers this week. He got a lot of volume, 8 targets and 19% target share. The thing about his game, he does not get the deep ball, 2.1 average depth of target, 17 air yards the whole damn game. So that makes him a liability, but he really has to rack up volume week to week. But on top of that, 11.9 PPR fantasy points. He was a wide receiver 3 last week in his first ever game. And his first ever game with Bo Nix, and Bo Nix was in his first ever game. So he was doing pretty good for the 26-year-old rookie who was out there. We're in a matchup this week against the Steelers, who does not play well against the slot. So those underneath routes might be open for Vele, and he might be getting those targets. Brock Bowers had 8 targets. For a rookie tight end, that's damn near elite. That is elite. Usually rookie tight ends don't do anything. He had a 25% target share in his first ever game as a tight end, and it wasn't even like a joke game or anything. Brock Bowers is legit. He was a first rounder, has elite speed, good after the catch. They're getting him work. He ran on 77.5% of the routes. His ADOT's low, but that's what you expect for tight ends. He was the tight end 3, so he's already giving you tight end 1 results here. So the upside's there. You're loving this because you're seeing him get used more and more throughout the season because this was his first ever start in the NFL. Malik Nabers, 7 targets, 18.4% target share. It took Justin Jefferson a few games for him to get fired up, and we're already running on 100% of the routes. 50 routes ran and 7 targets. Solid for your first ever game. Even with Daniel Jones there, 11.6 PPR fantasy points, wide receiver 32. So we are doing a little bit of something. We are getting a lot of workload. So when these game scripts start going the Giants' way, or the targets just start going his way and they're catchable, he's going to blow up. We're just waiting for him to blow up. He's running a lot of routes. 7 targets is good. We're pushing a 20% target share. Wan'Dale Robinson got a ton of targets in this game. More targets and a higher target share is going to be going to Malik Nabers sooner than later. Watch him blow up. He's dealing with a knee this week. We're watching him in practice. But still, there's a good chance with these numbers that he's going to blow up soon. Jalen McMillan's running as many routes as Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. 3 targets, though, 10%, but he made it count with a touchdown. A good 8 out of 18 yards, 54 air yards on 3 targets, which is very solid. Scored 10.2 PPR fantasy points, was the wide receiver 40. You love him as a flyer. You'll love him more if something happens to Godwin or Evans. That being said, Jalen McMillan, at the very least, should be on your radar. Bucky Irving, a 35.3% opportunity share. Carries, touches, and targets. So he's getting a lot of opportunities. 9 rushing attempts. Also 3 targets. 8 routes ran. He's getting a lot of workload. It was a weird game script against Washington, but him and Rachaad White's going to be a good pair throughout the season. He's a good stash for the end of your bench. Keon Coleman. We're not talking about last night's game. We're not going to be able to talk about Keon Coleman in next week's video because he did nothing. But what we're seeing from the Bills here is when they're running at a slower pace, they're not throwing the ball. First half of last week, week 1, 1 pass in the first quarter, 4 in the second quarter, 5 total in the first half. Last night's game, they weren't throwing it much. It was 16 pass attempts before we got to the very end, and then they rattled off a few more with Josh Allen. Finished off with like 19 or 20. With that many pass attempts, there's not much upside in the offense anyways for anybody to be really consistent in fantasy football. That's going to rack up, though. That's going to happen as we get down the line in the season. Keon Coleman, back half of that first game, he got 4 of his 5 targets in the second half. 3 of those 4 in the second half in the back end of the second half, where he started getting targets when the Buffalo Bills, Josh Allen, started firing away. 5 targets at 21.7% target share. All sounds great. Most of those targets second half when the team really need to push the ball. So when they're in matchups and they got to push the ball, that's when you're going to be looking at Keon Coleman. So really, when you think of this through, he's probably going to be up and down, but maybe a little bit slower too due to being a rookie, but might be volatile, kind of like a Gabe Davis type production, because in those slow-paced games or the slow-paced moments, he's not getting targets. But immediately when they start pushing it and pushing it downfield, it's going to Keon Coleman. He's running on 90% of the routes in that first game. First ever start in the National Football League. We're getting a lot of run. 9.1 PPR fantasy points, wide receiver 46. So technically it wasn't really startable. He hasn't been startable yet, but he showed some signs of life in week 1. Didn't in week 2. Xavier Legette, 7 targets at 24.1% target share and 8 out of 16. All this is elite, but this team was trailing big time to the Saints. 7.5 PPR fantasy points, wide receiver 55. But this is very encouraging considering he was injured throughout training camp and that he was on the field this much. Ran on 60% of the routes, which is good for a rookie that everybody's speculating on. He's got good size and just athleticism. His route running is more technical than what people give him credit for. Look at day 3 practices at the Senior Bowl when he was ripping off routes on those DBs. He can do it. It may not be consistent, but his game, size, adjusted speed, getting the ball over the middle, on them crossers, off the mesh, and really getting the yards after the catch. There's some upside here, and he gave you a little flash in week 1. But we're talking about the quarterbacks. The quarterbacks are always going to be at the top of the list, especially a guy like Jaden Daniels, 28.2 PPR fantasy points, QB3 for the week, got you the rushing production and some touchdowns. That's what we wanted from Jaden Daniels here. Bo Nix, QB 20, 11 fantasy points. Dinkin and Duncan. It started off kind of slow for him and not so good, but he got a little bit better throughout the game. Caleb Williams, it was ugly. It was ugly. QB 29 in fantasy. We got Houston this week. Can he push it with CJ Stroud? That is what we're watching this week. That is one of the major questions here. But when we look at this rookie class from 2024, so far we're looking good, especially those wide receivers, but they should be, because this wide receiver class was very deep, and we're going to see some more wide receivers start hitting throughout the season, start making some big moments here for fantasy football. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on the way out. I want to thank you for watching. Catch you on the next video.